This program was made possible with the generous support of the Magnolia of Millbrae. The Magnolia of Millbrae is a senior living community that provides a variety of services and amenities to its residents. For more information, call 650-697-7000 or visit their website at www.themagnolia.com. MCTV thanks them for their support.
Welcome to Wellness Update. My name is Sherry Plambeck. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing at the Magnolia of Millbrae. We are a senior retirement community located in Millbrae, and we offer independent living and assisted living. Today our topic is going to be resident advocacy, and our guest is Tippy Irwin, Executive Director of the Ombudsman Services Program for San Mateo County. Welcome, Tippy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure to have you here. Could you please explain to me what is an ombudsman?
I certainly can. Ombudsman is actually a misnomer. We are not ombudsman at all. An ombudsman, the word ombudsman was devised by the Swedish government to describe the individual that would negotiate for a settlement between a layperson and a government employee. And it implies neutrality. The individual would be neutral to come in to do that negotiation. We are not neutral. We are resident advocates, and the resident is always front and central in everything we do. The only time that we could be deemed to be neutral is if we're investigating a complaint and in the investigative process, where you're looking for facts.
Let me ask you this. How did the Ombudsman Service Program start?
In 2000, at least in the 1970s, Congress was receiving a lot of information on things that were going wrong in nursing homes, terrible things happening, and this was hitting the newspapers. And it finally culminated with an event where there was a fire in a nursing home, and the entire resident population died of smoke inhalation. And you can imagine that was a frenzy for the media. And in one of the interviews, the administrator of the facility said that what was everybody worrying about? They were old anyway. And at that point, Rolf Nader jumped in. And as a result of Rolf Nader's advocacy, Richard Nixon was in power at the time, and with the help of Rolf Nader and some other very strong advocates, the Ombudsman program was born, initially to cover just nursing homes, and then expanded to assisted living.
Now, how did the name long-term care come into existence?
Well, the long-term care industry came into existence after after Social Security became available to people. It put money into people's pockets when they retired, and so now they could pay for somebody to provide care for mom, because slowly but surely we've developed the two income family, and so people were no longer able to take care of their own loved ones, and they began to look to other solutions, which actually is where the long-term care industry was born out of that.
So long-term health care includes?
Well, long-term care is really a continuum, and it can start for many, and usually does, in the home, where after an illness or after a surgery, and then things might deteriorate from there. So they might start with in-home supportive services or with a family caregiver, and then as things deteriorate and they find they can no longer take care of the individual at home, they may go to assisted living, and then ultimately they may end up in a nursing home. So it's a continuum of care. It goes across a spectrum.
But do resident advocates that volunteer for the Ombudsman program, do they go to independent living, say age 55 and older, retirement communities?
No, the Ombudsman program only has access to nursing homes and assisted living facilities. Apart from there's other types of facilities we have access to that cover the developmentally disabled. So there's a whole range of facilities that cover them as well, which we have legal jurisdiction over.
Do residents in long-term care have rights?
Oh, absolutely. They don't abdicate any rights when they go into a facility. Somebody who's moving from their home to a facility maintains all the rights they had as a private citizen. So those rights are still front and central for them, although many of them think that they've lost their rights when they move into a facility.
So what are some of those rights that they have?
Well, the right to privacy, which is sometimes very difficult in a facility, particularly if they've got a roommate. But the right to privacy, the right to have access to telephone calls, to mail, to visitors, the right to live in a restraint-free environment, the right to live in an abuse-free environment. There's pages of rights. I think the most recent laws that have come out, which have now put a whole slew of residents' rights on the calendar, so to speak, are not rights that are new, but it's spelled out now in nursing homes, and I think you've seen those.
Yes, and I think it's very important for those to be spelled out for people so they do understand that residents do have rights, and privacy is really a key issue.
One of the big ones that I should mention is the right to dignity and respect. So to be talked to as though they're human beings, to be respected in whatever they're doing. Sometimes very missing in long-term care.
Well, when an ombudsman goes to a retirement community, are they responding to an allegation that has occurred, or are they just going there, perhaps they're just picking a particular community that day to visit?
There are 516 facilities in San Mateo County, and the jurisdiction of the program that I work for operates only in San Mateo County. So we have 516 facilities. We make
Is that growing?
Nursing homes have fallen. They've gone, in the last 10 years, we've dropped from 27 down to 17, but residential care facilities have grown. So it's changing. The face of long-term care is changing.
Which is exciting.
It is exciting, but it's also very challenging, because what's happening is, as nursing homes are changing, we're seeing people that would normally have been in nursing homes now in assisted living facilities.
So the acuity level is much higher in assisted living?
Much higher. They're beginning to look more like nursing homes than they have ever done in the past. But what hasn't caught up is the legislation or the laws that govern how the staff are trained. So the staff have the same training regulations that they've had for the past however many years, whereas they're actually dealing with people with much higher acuity now than they ever have done.
So when the ombudsman goes in, they're responding to different allegations.
Well,
so can you explain
not necessarily.
that?
We make between 4,500 and 5,000 visits a year in San Mateo County, and those are drop-in visits, just to monitor quality of care and quality of life, to check in with the residents, to check in with the staff. We like to build very strong working relationships with both the residents and the staff, so that they'll come to us when there are problems. We would like to be seen as part of the solution and not part of the problem. So really want to be included in things that are happening in the facility, so that we can work with the staff and the families to ensure that we resolve those issues. Now, we do receive complaints, obviously. So one of our core elements is that we receive complaints made by the residents or on behalf of the residents. So the complaints can come to us from staff, they can come to us from the resident themselves, from family members, from physicians, from emergency rooms, from wherever. We get complaints coming at us from all over, and we will investigate those complaints and then work to bring resolution to those complaints.
So the ombudsman is really there to be a resident advocate.
Totally a resident
100%.
advocate. Absolutely.
Now, what if a solution cannot be made from an issue that you've gone to inspect?
And there are times, we're dealing 70% of our clients, we estimate, have some form of dementia, so which is pretty high. And of course, that also runs across a spectrum. So there are people that have mild dementia to those that have very advanced Alzheimer's. And complaints come to us. We receive every complaint, no matter what the complaint is, and investigate. But it's not always easy to verify that something may or may not have happened to someone who has dementia and is not able to fully describe exactly what has happened. So there are things that we're not able to bring resolution to, or we're not able to verify.
Sometimes if a family has a loved one that is in an assisted living community and they have a complaint, maybe it's an abuse issue where they can see a bruise, etc. Does the family try to get the staff at that particular community to write that down in the residence chart? So
Well,
you have
it
something
should
to
be
go.
written in the residence chart. I mean, these things should be noted, but ultimately they probably would call us, because our posters are up in all the facilities. There are 4 posters in every nursing home, and there's 1 poster in every residential care facility for the elderly. So our name, our phone number, our fax number is all there, and I believe also our email address is there as well, so they can contact us by any means they wish to, if they wish us to investigate. We have to have resident permission to investigate, or the permission of the responsible party, before we can investigate. We can't just go in and investigate blindly because we think something has happened.
So would you say, is there frequent neglect in communities?
I would say there is neglect. I hesitate to say there's frequent neglect. There is certainly some neglect. And we've had some pretty horrendous cases of neglect. For example, a man who was placed in a small residential care facility, a 6-bed facility, and he was placed there because the owner was passing herself off as a nurse. They thought that his care was taken care of, and what was happening in the meantime was he developed bed sores, which they never saw. And he died ultimately of the bed sores and the sepsis that had occurred as a result of that. Well, that's neglect. So we see these things happening from time to time. I mean, there's lots of cases that we can talk about neglect.
Can you give me some other examples of abuse, whether it be physical, mental, financial?
Certainly. Mental abuse. One of my ombudsmen was in a nursing home on one occasion, and a resident wheeled himself he was at the nurse's station and wheeled himself up to the nurse's station, and saw an aide, or a nurse's aide there, and started screaming at the nurse's aide. He didn't want the nurse's aide anywhere near him. And my ombudsman thought that was very strange and began to investigate what was going on, talk to the family members and began to take a look at what was going on. And he had been extremely abused, both verbally and physically. They would pinch him, but they would pinch his nipple so that there was no bruising that you could see.
Oh my goodness.
And so, that was a situation that was an example of some physical abuse. Actually, a combination of both psychological and physical abuse that was going on with this man. There's lots of areas of abuse. We had a call this was in an adult residential facility, so for the disabled. We had a call from a staff member who'd been fired, and were asked, we were told that there was abuse happening there. Once we get a call from an employee that's dismissed, a lot of red flags go up for us, so we don't just jump in. So we told him, said to him, why did you wait till now to call us about abuse? And he explained to us that he was an illegal, and if he'd filed the abuse complaint, he would have lost his job. But now that he'd lost his job, he was making the allegation. And what he said to us was, I have 6 videotapes here. And of course our response was, where can we meet you? And we met him within half an hour. And he showed videotapes where the 6 residents sitting around a round table in the kitchen, and 6 caregivers all hanging around in the background. And the one caregiver grabbed the hair they were all in wheelchairs and all nonverbal, so extremely, extremely vulnerable. And he grabbed the hair of this individual and started spinning her wheelchair around with her hair, by her hair. And then another video showed a second individual with a wet tea towel. Out of the 6, one of them was blind. So they're all nonverbal, they're all non-mobile, not ambulatory. And then one of them was blind, and he is teasing, actually not teasing, but bullying this blind woman with a wet tea towel. He's flicking it in her face. She can't see when it's coming, and she's crying out. And the residents the caregivers are just laughing. So we worked very closely with the police, with the licensing body, and the facility was closed in 2 weeks. Very unusual.
What happens with financial abuse? Do you see a lot of that going on?
We do. Yes, we do. And of course, it's something that has increased enormously. We're dealing with a case right now where a resident had he needed access to his bank account, and the only way he could get access to the bank account was to give his ATM card to one of the caregivers. And she had stolen money from him. So, these things happen. But he is fully in control of his senses, and he reported it immediately, and so I think we're going to be able to, the police are working on it. So we work very closely with the police. We work closely with the police, with the district attorney's office, with whoever we need to work with to try and bring some resolution to these issues. That may be something that...
What is the difference between resident-centered care and medical-centered care?
Well, when nursing homes began with the birth of Social Security, they were modeled after the hospital. So they began to look very institutional and very like hospitals. And of course, the hospital, if you want to go back a little further, is modeled after what was happening in the military. So in fact, we have a military model that's being still used today in the nursing homes. Everybody wakes up at 5:30 because that's when the med pass is. Breakfast is delivered at 8 o'clock. That's just because that's the way it's done. Those are the kinds of things in terms of quality of life that are happening. And very recently I had a nursing home that thought it was okay to wake their residents up at 4:30 in the morning to weigh them. And they got a message back from me to say that's absolutely unacceptable. So they changed to 6 o'clock, and they got another message back to say that's unacceptable too. You weigh them when they wake up. There's no reason to do these kinds of things for the convenience of the staff. We need to work with the residents to make sure that this is more home-like, more a style of living and a style of life that they might have had in their own homes. Because after all, these are nursing homes. So it's a case of putting the home back in the nursing home.
So what happens in the case of a residential care facility where everybody dines, say, from 7:30 to 10 a.m., but a particular resident, due to maybe an illness at the time, is not really getting up until 11? Would it be proper for them then to be able to dine at 11 if that was a good time for them? How does that work?
We would certainly encourage a facility to offer the resident breakfast at that time if that's when they wake up. In other words, the biological clock is the resident's biological clock, and so we would ask that be considered as a possibility. And I think in most cases it will, but I mean from 8:30 to 10 or whatever, that's a pretty long period of time. And that would accommodate, I would say, 99% of people would be able to fit in with that. But there will be an occasional time when maybe somebody's not well, maybe they, for whatever reason, they're not able to meet that, then we would expect the facility to accommodate the resident. And
what about the issue of hurrying a resident? I mean, everybody goes at their own pace.
Resident-centered care is an interesting, and again, as I mentioned, 70% of our clients have dementia, and clients with dementia may lose the ability to adequately communicate verbally. But there are other ways they can communicate. There are a lot of behaviors that are sometimes manifest in clients with dementia, and that's a form of communication. So it's up to us as caregivers or as people that are advocating for the residents to find out what is it that they're communicating. One of the things that you will find if you go into a room of a resident who's already agitated and you're agitated when you walk in the door, they'll pick that up immediately, even if they're nonverbal. So you want to be very careful in your communication with your clients, with these elderly folk, so that nothing is in your behaviors that will cause them any further agitation or bring about adverse behaviors from them. So it's very important to put aside your own anxieties, your own anger. You might have just been in a tiff with another staff member. You may have had an angry family member on the phone with you. You want to put that behind. The minute you cross the threshold of that resident's door, they will pick up all the anxieties, all the anger, whatever is there, and you will not be able to communicate with them in the way that you think you will, or to get them to do anything.
You know, that reminds me of a story. I remember one Christmas, I was working at a community and we were getting this particular resident. It was a dementia community. We're getting the resident ready to go to have a lovely day with her family. And this resident had been a former model and did not like to shower though. And the staff had really tried for about 2 hours that morning to get this resident to shower, and nothing was working. And then they came to me and I said, you know, maybe what we should try to do is pretend we're having a fashion show and she can be part of a fashion show. So really she needs to be pampered and have a shower and then look at several outfits and then try to decide one that is going to make her feel the most glamorous, like she's on the runway. And actually that worked.
Absolutely.
But that probably took us a good 4.5 to 5 hours. But in reality, that made that family very happy and made the resident so much less agitated.
Right. I was watching a video actually the other day, and it was on bathing, and they had a resident in the shower room, and they were trying to they had showered. No, had they showered her? No, they hadn't. They were trying to get her undressed to shower her. And she wasn't having anything to do with them. She didn't want them to touch her. She didn't want them to come near her. She was very angry and very agitated. And finally, the one caregiver turned to the other one and said, go and fetch Susan. Susan knows how to work with her. Well, Susan comes into the room and puts her arms around this resident and says, I don't remember what the resident's name is, but Mary Jo, how are you today? It's so good to see you. And Mary Jo's face lit up into a smile, and Susan could have done anything for her. And what she said to the two caregivers, she said, you have to understand, Mary Jo has had 15 children or 12 children or whatever it was. She's a caregiver herself. And she's very nurturing and very loving. And the way to get her to do anything is to be that way to her, to be nurturing and loving with her, and she will respond to you. So that's all part of resident-focused care. And so great job for doing what you did. That's exactly what we're talking about in terms of resident-focused care. And yes, it may take 5 hours this time, but next time it'll take less time.
But the happiness
exactly.
that it brought the resident,
exactly.
the family, and even the caregivers
Yeah.
to learn to take a different approach
Yeah.
to handling a particular situation. What happens in the case of an ombudsman if they're at a community? Do they need to be invited to a family planning meeting? Or how does that work on behalf of the resident?
We do about 2,000 cases a year. And of those, 40% of, or even more than that probably, but 40% of them involve direct resident care. We are often invited to come to care plan conferences. So when there's an issue that arises, maybe with a resident that's been exhibiting difficult behaviors, and nobody's able to really resolve that, they may have what we call an IDT meeting or an interdisciplinary team meeting, and all the caregivers that are involved in any way, the therapists, whoever it is, will come to a meeting, and it'll be discussed how can we, including the resident. Resident should be there. Family members should be there, and we're often invited to those conferences, and so we'll participate with the team to see if what the resolutions could be, or to work through possible resolutions.
And what about a resident council meeting or a family council meeting?
Same thing. We have to be invited. We can't just walk in the door to a family council or a resident council meeting. So we must be invited. And very often when an ombudsman is new in a facility, they ask to be invited so that they can introduce themselves to the residents and just outline again what the role of the ombudsman is, so that they can get to meet all the players. And then some of our ombudsmen have standing invitations, and they go to all of the resident council meetings, and others go occasionally. And if they want to go, they can talk to the chair of the resident council and see if they can get an invitation.
How does one become an ombudsman?
Well, you have to be over 18. Contact our office. Call us. We're very, very, very short of ombudsmen. We have 8 staff at the moment, and I have about 40 long-term care ombudsmen that are volunteers that work with us. I don't call them volunteers because they really are an extension of staff. They do the most extraordinary, wonderful work for us. They're trained to monitor the facilities, to receive complaints, and to investigate those complaints. They are invaluable to us. We're always looking for people willing to do this work. So if anybody's interested, I would be grateful if they'd give us a call. We can talk about it. But it's a 40-hour training, so it's quite extensive. It's a 40-hour training, and then
that in 1 week?
No. We spread it out over several weeks, and we take them out to visits in the facilities at the same time, so they are at least getting to see hands-on what's happening in the facilities. And then at the end of the 40-hour training, there's a brief internship where they actually go into the facilities to do the monitoring and the investigation themselves and will work a case. But they're working very closely with staff people at that time. And then once that's over and it's completed successfully, we submit their names to the state for state certification as long-term care ombudsman.
Now, do they have to keep that certification up on a yearly basis
They
or
do.
take continuing education classes?
They do. There's 12 hours of education required to keep that up. We provide that training, and then there are other trainings. There's lots and lots of training around that would be very appropriate, and they can select to do that instead of coming to one of our trainings. So there's lots of choices and lots of possibilities for training. But yes, they're required to do 12 hours of training.
What other issues are facing the Ombudsman program now?
Well, we have some goals at the moment. Actually, the county is doing quite well with them. In the past, for example, we have worked on reduction of restraints. And so we took that on, and over a 2-year period, we got the restraints down from 17%, meaning that 17% of residents were tied up in any facility. This is in the nursing homes, because it's the only ones. The nursing homes are the ones we have the numbers for. We have actual statistics. And in 2 years, we reduced it down from 17% to less than 3%, which is now that the rest of the state has caught up, but it took them a couple of years to do so. So very proud of that. We led the way. We did the education, and we educated our ombudsman, we educated the facility staff, and we just worked and worked and worked until we finally got them to understand restraints were not okay. We're now working on what some people call chemical restraints. 25% of nursing home residents across the nation are prescribed psychotropic drugs. And a lot of that is inappropriate prescription. They're prescribed the drugs to control behaviors, the dementia behaviors. And it's actually contraindicated. It's not safe to give clients with dementia psychotropic drugs. The research
And an example of those drugs would Haldol be an example of that?
Oh, definitely Haldol, yes. Probably the queen of all of them. There's a whole slew of them, and I'm no expert on drugs, but Haldol is definitely one of them. So we want to see a reduction in that. In our county, we have got that down to less than 10%. And again, I'm working with the nursing homes because that's where we have the numbers, but it also applies to assisted living. We would like to see those numbers come down. The only question is, how do we get at the numbers in the first place? We don't have access to numbers in assisted living. They're not required to file them with anybody. So we have no clue what the extent of the use of psychotropics in assisted living facilities
Now,
is.
assisted living communities are licensed under the Department of Social Services,
Correct.
and skilled nursing is licensed under the Department of Health. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
And most of the issues that are really occurring are perhaps more happening in skilled nursing than assisted living?
Well, I think because they are obliged to file statistics with the Center for Medicare and Medical Services, and so we get the statistical analysis from CMS, from Center for Medicare and Medicare Services. So we are much more aware of what is happening in those facilities because of the accessibility of the data, whereas there's no such requirement in assisted living. So we're kind of stumbling in the dark in terms of knowing exactly what's happening in the background there.
But every human being is really a mandated reporter then for abuse issues? Am I correct
Not every
on that?
human being, no. The ombudsman are mandated reporters, but anybody that works in a facility, so from the janitor right through to the CEO, anybody who works in a facility with this group of people are mandated reporters. Or anybody that works in the healthcare system with people that are in any way vulnerable are mandated reporters. But not just any citizen on the street, no.
What if a citizen on the street saw an incident?
We would ask them to report. You know,
Okay.
I use the epithet, am I my brother's keeper? And actually, I believe that we all have some responsibility to be our brother's keeper, particularly if they're losing the ability to be their own advocate, their own keepers, in a sense. We would ask that every citizen, any citizen, be aware of what's going on with neighbors, with other family members. Be aware And if you suspect abuse, the standards for reporting are simply that you suspect that there might be abuse. That will be investigated by people that are accustomed to investigating, APS if they're in independent living, or Ombudsman if they're in the facilities. We don't verify every abuse complaint that comes to us by a long chalk, but let the experts do the investigation, and then move from there. You know, if abuse has happened, then let's see where that goes.
Well, I think this has been very informative today, and I would like to thank you so much, Tippy, for coming. Hopefully the audience is much more aware of so many abuse issues and how to really handle them. Thank you so much for joining us today. Live each day. Life is so very precious.
And thank you very much for having me.
Our pleasure.
This program was made possible with the generous support of the Magnolia of Millbrae. The Magnolia of Millbrae is a senior living community that provides a variety of services and amenities to its residents. For more information, call 650-697-7000 or visit their website at www.themagnolia.com. MCTV thanks them for their support.